welcome to another episode of Connecting Conversations. And I'm delighted to have someone all across the way of the Atlantic, Sahba Rohani. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I can't wait to hear your story. How are you?
Thank you. It's so nice to be here from all the way on the other side of of the globe. It's really lovely to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
For sure. And I think it's really good to kind of talk a little bit about how we met, because you are literally a recent, and I'd say very famous in my world now, TEDx speaker, which has been an incredible achievement. And that's how we got connected, because we were at the event and I heard you speak, and you sharing your story was so powerful. And I thought, I need to capture that in something more permanent, because I think that our values just align so
Mhm.
much. And I just wanted to be able to give another opportunity to really amplify just the amazing work that you do and the power of what you carry. So, Sakwa, thank you for being with us. And it'll be
Yeah.
great if you maybe gave us a little bit of insight in terms of who you are and a bio of what you do. It'll be good to hear that.
Yeah. Thank you, Carla. Yeah, I feel equally grateful for that as well. Yeah, I recently got to share part of my own personal story on the TEDx stage in Prague a few weeks ago at this point. And I think that has like significant uh, meaning to me just because so much of my personal story has impacted um, my journey and the choices that I've made around the type of work that I do now. And so
Mm,
I really, it was a process to get ready for that talk in a way, not just like the process of like preparing for a TED talk, which is like, just the memorization and getting exactly what you want down and all of that. Like all of that is, of course, is a whole different thing that we could probably spend another hour to talk about. But this was more just like what my own personal journey to tell a story, a part of a story that for many years was very hard for me to tell. And I had a lot of shame around, and I had a lot of guilt around. And I think to be able to stand on a stage in front of people and to share part of that story with others, um, like just was its own sort of emotional and spiritual journey for me to get to that place. um yeah, and I'd love to share sort of like what just the reaction from the audience, how that sort of has now continued to be a part of my story. But I'll pause and just share a little bit about like how yeah, like how I got to that place. But I grew up, my parents immigrated here from immigrated to the United States from Iran. They had come to the US in search of sort of better education for themselves and then ended up staying, and not able to go back because a revolution broke out and because they were members of a religious minority as members of the Baha'i faith. They like the ability to go back in that same way was sort of taken from them. So they were sort of forced to create a life, and raise my sister and I in a country that was new to them, that they didn't know. I find myself slipping back into my TED talk. Like I end up slipping back to what I shared in my story there because it's so ingrained in your memory. So if you're listening to this and you end up hearing the TED talk, you might hear some similarities. Um,
I'm here for it. Here for it. Love it so much.
yeah. Um, so yeah, I think for me, starting school, I grew up like my first few years of life, we only spoke Farsi, or
Mhm.
Persian at home. So I grew up only, like not really speaking English, the first few years of my life. And so much about who I was like really impacted by this like family that I had. It was around like what we celebrated was really different than what was celebrated in quote unquote mainstream America. And then like, the way we talked, the way we what we ate, the way like everything about who we were was so different that and I wasn't prepared for it. When I started school, I was suddenly, one of the only kids who like had skin like I did or hair like I did and spoke a different language at home and all of those things, especially that first day of school. And I would say like every day um, afterwards, it was just this constant reminder that this is not a place where you are seen or valued or heard for who you are in your whole self. And I spent so many of those early days of my life, those formative days of my life, just trying to figure out how to fit in to my classroom community, to my school community. And so the story I ended up telling at TED, which had a big impact on me, was just actually the sort of the initial shock of that, of sort of being so different when you walk into a kindergarten classroom. So as a 4 and 5-year-old, to suddenly have that initial shock, and then the just like the for me that painful moment of wanting to like change my name completely and be called
Oh.
something so different than what like my parents with thought and intention gave me this name, and then for me to choose or decide at that age to want to change that and then move through all of school with a completely different name, which is the story I sort of tell in the talk, is was really the so impactful for me. It was such a lens with which I started to think about what belonging means and what it means to like really feel in community or part of a community. And so there are these like very formative sort of moments in school growing up that then had this big impact on me as a grown up as well. So yeah, I think just telling that story just had this really um, profound, it was sort of a profound journey for me in a lot of ways to get to the point where I could share that story,
Mm.
and also feel really proud of not just not of sort of like what came as a result, you know. So
Mm.
um so much of so much I think of that, of those, of most of elementary school, middle and high school were around like just navigating that concept of fitting in and that concept of belonging. um and I ended up, my journey has taken me to like really be in the field of education, and I've spent over the last 20 plus years both in formal and in informal educational settings, thinking about and working on and supporting communities around what it means to create like communities of belonging for kids, and what does it mean to really have spaces where children are seen as their whole selves
Mm.
and honored as
Mm.
their whole selves, and what impact that can have on the larger, like the ripple effects that can have, you know, even though they seem small, what are the ripple effects that one simple thing of just having a child be accepted and known and honored as their in their full humanity, what that looks like. So that's the journey I've committed myself to, and it has
And
deep roots from my own personal story.
and that really came through so loudly, not just in your talk, but in meeting you and getting to know you as an individual. And you've already alluded to that, it really has infiltrated through your work. Your why about what you do is so clear, it's like coming to your pores. And I'm always intrigued and passionate to connect with others who kind of function that way, because it really reeks of a sense of authenticity that I think is
Mm,
quite rare to find.
mm,
And you're living it, you're breathing it, you're talking it, you've made this your life's dedication, as you said. I'd love to know, like, what was the most surprising or impactful response that you received from the audience after you bore your soul that day? This talk, when anyone has a chance to come across it, you will see just how raw, how true and authentic it was. Like,
mm.
what's been the responses that you've heard subsequent to doing that talk?
Yeah, so as of right now, today, mid-December, the talk hasn't been sort of shared outside of who was in the audience when we
Mm-hmm.
shared it. Um, And I think what I was the most blown away with is just people coming up to me and just like looking me in the eye and saying, "Thank you for making me feel seen." Um, and just the idea that like you sharing a part of yourself can allow the space for somebody else to connect with themselves to also be seen. I think um that was really impactful. And the other conversation, one of the ones that stands out the most to me, was someone came to me and said, I had sort of buried, they said, I have a similar experience. I spent a lot of a lot of my schooling being embarrassed of who I was because I was so different. And I had sort of buried that. But listening to your
Mm.
talk helped me. I was suddenly remembering, like, oh my goodness, like this happened, and oh my goodness, this happened. Which of course, like, you never want to re-traumatize anyone. But I do think there's there's something about being honest and truthful about like our histories. I think that has collective implication too. Like, how are we honest and truthful about the history that we tell in our countries and in our world? And
Mm.
that like accepting that history and honoring that history, but also then saying what do I shift or change, whether it's personally or collectively, towards change, can be really powerful when it's rooted in that history and that shared experience. So I think that was a very that moment was for me really really beautiful too. And just so many folks came to me and said, you know, like I ended up changing my name, or like I looked different, or my family spoke a different language, and just so many, you know. And I remember when we were preparing for the talk, my dear friend who is like curating the event said, I have a feeling that this will resonate on a different on a level with a lot of folks. And I sort of like trusted him, but I didn't realize to what extent. And then just from that small like group of, I mean, it was a pretty large group. We had like, I think 500 folks there, but just from that,
Yeah, right.
the amount of sort of feedback around this reminded me of this, and just being able to hear other people's stories was so
Mm.
impactful. I think a lot about storytelling in my work right now. I serve as the executive director of Roots Connected. And as an organization, we work with schools and organizations across the United States on practices that help us to center the humanity in one another and what it means to really like be in community with folks who are different than you know? And we think a lot about that power of storytelling. And obviously, there's so much research around what that does. I know you all do that a lot in your podcast. Just listening to stories allows us to humanize and connect and make meaning and all of those things. And Valerie Kaur, I don't know if you know her, she's a activist and a writer. Um, and she talks about how storytelling, she says storytelling is the precursor to justice. And I just love
Mm.
that. I love that idea. I love thinking about that because storytelling is in the locus of our control. We have the power to create, to tell our stories and to make space to hear other stories, and to think
Yeah.
about that being one small way that we're working towards
Mm.
creating spaces of justice feels really like empowering to me, and that's what that reminded me of.
I love that so much. I have two things that just popped into my head just listening to you speak so beautifully on that. The first thing was when you said that you were so kind of bowled over by how much this connected with other people that had very different lives to you, but the principle of what you experienced was something that, even though like I never thought about it that way, but what you did in your sharing was provide language and a framework for people to
Mm,
process. A lot of the time we're in survival mode,
mm,
or we're just getting on with it, or there wasn't actually, like you say, we think there's no room for this to be an issue, we just have to get on and
mm,
keep up with the rest of the rat race
mm,
that we're in. So I can only imagine, and I was in the audience on that day, so I know that that's exactly how I experienced listening to your talk in terms of its impact. It really released that, not just empowering, but it was almost permission.
mm,
You can go down and think about the pinpoints that were important to you. They are valid, and you validated that in
mm,
such a beautiful way. The second thing I wanted to ask you about is, obviously a lot of your work is now, and your story when you shared it with your TED Talk speech was about this sense of belonging. You are now someone who has set a precedent for what belonging can look like. You function and occupy various diverse spaces. How do you get your sense of belonging now that you're so confident in what you bring?
oh my goodness, that's a really good question and really hard too. um you know, I think like there's no this work we think about, we talk about this a lot in Roots Connected. We have sort of a framework for change.
Mm,
And we talk about how creating like sustainable change requires what we call personal transformation and then collective transformation. And it requires both of those things working in order for us to actually see shifts and changes happen. What I mean by that is that personally, we have to be committed to ongoing learning and unlearning. We have to be committed to leaning into like revolutionary love and leaning into understanding and recognizing our own biases and our own positionality and our own power and where and how that plays
mm,
out. That's ongoing transformational work, right? And that means like every day, that's part of the work that I have to do. And I think
mm,
the other piece of it is this collective transformation. So I could sit in my own silo and I could reflect and I could think about my change and I could think about, how can I unlearn this and how can I do this differently, and how I could do that, right? And that's part of my personal transformation. But unless that is then accompanied with a space for collective change, so that means looking at my sphere of impact. Sometimes it just means, how am I shifting the conversations I'm having with my partner or with my family members or with, right? Sometimes it means that. And sometimes it means like in my work or in my religious communities, um, in other like communities that I'm a part of, how am I making or creating change? And we can't, I don't think, like learn about we can't move the personal work forward unless we're in the practice of the collective work, if that makes sense. And we can't
yeah.
do the collective work if we're not um, being like regularly reflective about our own stuff, our own personal transformation. So I'm going around a way to answer your question, I think. But um, for me, the work is just ongoing. It's constant. There's sometimes I'm in spaces where I'm suddenly that little girl again, and I'm suddenly like, I don't know, like how do I use my voice here, and what is, whereas like I've spent my whole life working towards like how do we create these spaces, but there are moments where I have those, like everybody's completely different from me, and I'm feeling scared again and I'm feeling alone again, then that's like pushes me to say, what is it that I'm like learning, and what is it that, right? And then how am I creating that change? And then it's also that constant awareness, like the lens that I have to move through the world with, so that and when I'm in spaces where people come from really different backgrounds and think really differently, how am I positioning myself as a learner in that space, I think that I think it's the constancy of being reflective and recognizing that we never are done with something. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Um,
mm,
which like this work that I'm engaged in, the work we do with schools, the work we do around belonging, the work we do around community building, the work we do around like centering and seeing humanity, it's all
mm,
process work. It's never going to be something that's like, that's it, we did it, it's done. Like, here we go. A community of belonging has been created, done. It's constant, right? Which I think was
mm,
one
mm,
thing that was so, I realized about myself, because my life has been all process work. You never feel like a sense of completion. But that day when I walked off the TED stage and I actually memorized and delivered 18 minutes. I said, oh my goodness, this is something I did it. I did the thing and it's done. And it was like this, like really like, I was like, this is what it feels like to finish
yeah,
something
mm,
and be done with something. That feels really
mm.
good, because the rest of my life, I feel, is all process work. I think I answered your question. I'm hoping I did.
You did. You
Okay.
definitely did. And what I was asking was the approach more than anything else, and you really, really gave great detail into that. So thank you. I think what comes to mind when I hear you speak of that process, and you have clearly not only have you identified that it's a process, you've lent into that this is ongoing work. It's a lifetime of dedication. It's not a 9 to 5 that you wrap up. My question to you is like, someone like yourself is clearly you're constantly in a growth mindset. What have been some of the challenges that you've encountered in your professional work when you are trying to bring this into spaces that maybe are not really good at that, or you get pushback with it. How have you navigated trying to get breakthrough and impact in those environments?
Yeah. It's a real question, you know? It's a real thing that we come up against. Um, and I think we always go back to the why. Like,
Mm,
why does this work matter? Um, and I think especially for us, as we work predominantly in schools. We have started to do this work also in organizations and in other settings, but predominantly we're working with schools. That's where our work has grown. And you go back to like, what do we want for children? And what do we want for like the next generation and the next generation? And I think when we get on our own ways as grown-ups, I think there's so much messiness, right? Like we're human and there's messiness in humanity and that's okay. But I think sometimes that can be a block for what we're actually trying to do and trying to create. So we always, in those moments that feel hard, go back to like, what's right for kids? What do we want for children? And at the end of the day, most folks can agree that what we want for kids is that they feel loved and cared for and that they feel like they belong. And then it's like, how do we create those spaces? Then what does that look like? And how do we
mm,
get out of the way to be able to create those spaces? I think we can often like get into, but what about this? Or I think this, and let's not do this. But if we really, again, like peel it back and say, like, what do we generally want for our kids? And what do we want for our future, right? Like, we're creating, like, we have the capacity now to co create what the future will look like. And that's through
mm,
what and how our kids are treated. There's a beautiful saying in my religious tradition that's around like regarding humanity as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value, right? So if we imagine that each of us, but each of those little kids are like a gem, right? And it says
mm,
education is what can sort of like reveal and allow that gem to shine. And so I think a lot about like what how are we working to create
mm,
like the spaces where kids own gems. And when I say that, I mean like their capacities, right? Like each of these children have these like beautiful like capacities and strengths and and like ways of being that if we allow that space, like imagine how the world can feel so different. And I think that's where we always try to lean back on that, going
mm,
back to the why. And so like we
mm.
as grown-ups are sitting in a room trying to figure this out, but really like what we want is what's best for kids. We can all agree to that. And then how do we create the spaces to do that?
That is just no small undertaking at all. And I say
Yeah,
that reverently for anyone that chooses
I know.
to commit and devote their life in the way that you have. One of my questions, I think, just coming from what you're saying, is with the understanding of the gravity of that work. That's tough every day. I can imagine it's never a light day when that's your why. And I guess my question is like, what keeps you motivated and hopeful to keep doing such important work when I imagine when you see progress or impact, it probably takes a lot longer than maybe something that might be a bit more of a simpler, general commercial kind of job.
Yeah.
How do you stay in the game? How do you stay just as passionate, just getting up and turning up for this role every day?
Yeah. Gosh, there's so many incredible activists and resistors in our past who've done such beautiful work around how we should care for ourselves.
Mm,
Um, and I draw a lot of inspiration from from them, those before us who have been in the work
mm,
of resistance and in the work of change for so long.
yeah.
So I think partially it's that. Partially is keeping a level of like not a level like keeping humility, right? That I have like the honor and the privilege to be able to do this work, but this work is not me, and it's not about me. And I think that allows you to sort of see yourself as indispensable. And I know that that sounds strange, but it's more about just recognizing that the work is bigger than you. So if you need to take space, if you need to take rest, if you need to do that in order to show up, like that's okay if you're working in community, and other folks, will fill in and can do that, and that sort of thing. I think just recognizing that it doesn't rest on like my shoulders or my team's shoulders, or right, that like the work is ongoing. And so it's not like we use this phrase a lot with the schools that we work with, because we see the urgency of this work, right? It is not lost on us that this work feels urgent. We are in a time in our history um,
Mm.
that just is riddled with division in so many ways. Like we are just constantly pitted against each other in so many ways. Um, and so we recognize the urgency of like needing to do this work. Like let's create curriculum that teaches to that allows kids, allows representation, allows truth, allows authenticity. Like let's do that. Let's create communities of belonging for kids. Like all these things feel so urgent. But we always say like we have to go slow to go far, which again can feel so hard. It's like, what do you mean? But we have to change this and this. But if we don't do that, then like, yeah, we either lose steam, we get exhausted ourselves, or we're not thoughtful and intentional about the way we're moving forward. So that tension there, the like moving slow to go far, is something that's like a constant part of every day, really. And so again, it's like drawing a lot of like inspiration from resistors and activists and everything in the past who like have just been committed to doing work for change. I think that is helpful and inspirational. I think being connected to community is so important. So like recognizing that there are spaces to connect with others and be with others in change. I draw a lot for myself. I a lot on prayer and meditation and just like connecting with the divine in a way to as a source of comfort and solace in a lot of ways. I think it's a lot of like I'm beyond blessed to have a team. Our team at Roots Connected is like just incredible humans who also just see the value of the work. And so I think when one of us is exhausted, being able to like say that or have grace with that, yeah, I think it's a lot of different things. It's ongoing for me. It's not easy. I'm not someone who um I'm the eldest daughter of immigrants to a country where like so much was relied on you because you're the first to do certain things. Um, and so by nature, I'm I take care, that's my
Mhm.
nature.
Mhm.
So it's a constant learning and unlearning for me around what it means to like lean into also just the like beautiful unfoldment of the
Mhm.
universe, which again is so hard to see sometimes. And then one other thing I was thinking about based on your question is just it's those small moments with people. It's like we just finished this like 3-day training with a bunch of educators from all across the country, all across the US. Sorry, I should remember it's a different I keep saying all across the US. They had come together to our learning site in Brooklyn and New York, and we were in these like spaces of learning with adults, and then just watching folks have this like, yeah, like I want to commit to this kind of change, or this is reminding me of what it means, like why I even got into the field of education. It's like these small things that folks say, these like spaces of like these aha moments of learning where you're like, oh, this is like all worth it, or we have like, I've never been asked that question. And this is the first time I'm thinking about this. And to know that like you were a small part of somebody's learning journey, that is so inspiring to me. And those things like keep me going as well.
Mhm. Mhm. I respect that so, so much. And thank you for really elaborating that in the candor that you have. I guess my question is like, what is the big dream for Sakwa to see where your work ends up, or what you'd love to see in your
Oh,
lifetime
oh
of
my
just
gosh.
gaining the ground and the impact with the passion that you have?
Yeah. I read once where like if our dreams can be achieved in our lifetime, they're not big enough, you know? And I don't know if my I don't know if I'll see the fruition of my dream in my lifetime, and that's okay because it's beyond me, you know. Um,
Uh-huh.
but I think a lot about my 4-year old niece and like watching her school experience. And my dream is for, I there are times when she comes home from school and she says like, I'm not going to do this because this friend said not to do this, or I'm not going to, like, she just talks about these really hard moments, you know? She talks about beautiful things too, and she's so wonderful. But I watch her and her spirit, I feel is like the spirit I had before I went to school. And then I watch her go to school and I'm like, I don't want school to change that spirit that you have. Like, I don't want school to like become like to put out your light or your flame in any way, you know? And little things she says, suddenly I'm like, oh no, like don't let them tell you that like your expression and your like, dance moves and your way of being is like not good enough, or not this, or it's silly, or it's too, those kinds of things. And I think a lot about how school, like education and school, can be a place of transformation and growth and encouraging kids to be like their selves, you know, and to be in community with others. I think that's another big thing. It's not just everyone be yourself and just what to in whatever way you want, but it's like how are you yourself, but also um understanding that there's interdependence. Like you are part of a community. So what you
Yeah.
need right now, sometimes, yeah, you'll get like what you need in that moment. And sometimes it's about being conscious about like, what does everyone else need in this community? And how do I
Yeah.
learn to be in community? That's, I think, the power of like having a school space is like learning in my dream it's that children go to school and they're able to like recognize, understand their talents, their capacities, who they are, all their beauty, and to be able to say, what does that mean within the context of a community? How do I refine and make myself even more perfect because of the people around me and understanding myself? I don't know if I'm getting too meta, but I think
Yeah,
in
no, that's good. That's good.
the grand scheme, that's the dream. The dream is that schools can be spaces where kids understand themselves better and understand themselves within the context of community better too. Understand how to be in community better.
I think
Yeah.
what you're saying is so true, so powerful, and probably kind of revolutionary in some ways,
Yeah.
if not countercultural. Because if I think about a lot of the Western world, it's a lot of self actualization. How do I get to my successes? But there's very little acknowledgement about, utilize the kind of help and the source of the community aspect that you're talking about. I think now when I listen to professionals or other successful people, they are absolutely advocating it's your connections that's your real currency. It's your connections with people. But that's not like primarily what you hear advocated by society, if I'm honest. It's about like which way do I get to the top so that I stand for something. And what you're saying, I think, is so true. And the reality is we don't get to our destinations alone, really. I think there is that African proverb: if you want to go somewhere fast, you go alone, but if you want to go somewhere far, you go together.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of the crux and the tension that you're speaking about, is getting people, especially young people, comfortable with it's not just about me. I have great gifts to bring. I need to actualize them. I need to mobilize them. I need to exhaust them so that I can really give it its full potential. But it's never just about me then. It's like,
Yeah.
how is this going to interconnect me with others who will have also been going through that same process, but
Yeah.
likely their process and success of their gift coming to the fore is going to amplify me somehow, and vice versa, which is
Yeah.
really not what we're hearing and talking about very often
Yeah.
in our school environments, in our business environments. But
Yeah.
actually, for really great success to be achieved, we can't neglect exactly what you're speaking about in this. How do I be good myself, but be good as part of a community? This has been
Yeah.
an incredible conversation,
Yeah.
Sakwa. We should be here writing your book.
Oh my
I love it. But I
goodness.
just wanted to end the conversation with one more question to you. And
Yeah.
that is, even though you shared just, I think, a wealth of wisdom through this brief conversation, which has been incredible, what would be maybe a piece of advice you could share to others also feeling called to the path that you follow, but maybe occupying a different space, but they're motivated by similar values, and why is they get up because they know that they are called to do something, that they see that whether this is my lifetime or not, there's nothing, even if I don't want to, I have to wake up and do this work because it's so important. A piece of advice for those, like, maybe not as visible as you, not at the places that you're at yet, but also feel called to similar um kind of impact. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe that each of us as human beings have latent within us all of the virtues, and I think that's like a can be a coded word, but what I mean by that, like we have latent within us all the capacities, like truthfulness, like kindness, like love, like honesty, like our true like reality. I believe every human being has the capacity for all of those things, and we each have this uniqueness about us that has been built from our lived experiences, how we move through the world, right, and how we exercise or create that version of ourselves with all of those things, right? Like, in what ways am I truthful, in what ways am I honest, in what ways am I
Mm,
do I show love?
yeah.
We each have that uniqueness. One of my good friends calls it like our blueprint, right? Like we each have like our own blueprint and how we sort of like who we are in this world. And one of the best pieces of advice someone gave me was to find well, my father used to always say this to me. My father would always say, find work that brings you joy and do that work because it will be so much of your life. So find something that you care about and that brings you joy. But this other person had said, like, you are this unique person, you are unique in this world, so
Mm,
find what do you want to contribute to the betterment advancement of this world for the finite time we have on this earth, and do
mm,
that thing. And it can look so many different ways, but how do we like realize what it is, like our capacity? What is it that I myself, Sahba Rohani, can bring to the world to create some sort of change? And how do I then do that, knowing that this is the part that I will play to make change, whether it's in this, like within my home, or whether it's within my community, or whether it's in a larger scale. But I think each of us has the capacity to like work towards creating change. And if we all have that orientation, then we see a shift in a different way. But I think it's like finding the thing that brings you joy and that you're really good at, because each of us are really good at something different, and then doing that thing in service
mm.
of the betterment of society, or in service of working towards justice.
I
I
love
don't
that.
know.
That is a beautiful, beautiful piece of advice. Find out what you're good at, find out what you love, find out what brings you joy, and it kind of will open the pathway for you, I think, just from that space. Sakwa, this has been incredible talking with you, hearing your story, just the power of your wisdom and how you're choosing to kind of really serve people with it is just super inspiring. So thank you so much for your time
Thank you.
and sharing your heart with us. It's been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for myself as well. Highlight of my day, truly. Thank
Love
you
it.
for allowing me the space to share a part of myself. I think that what you're doing is a gift to others, to allow them the space to share a part of themselves. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much. And just wishing you all the best with your work. Way to continue to follow and hopefully collaborate further in future. Thank you so much, Sakwa.